Hi everybody. I've had a lot of requests for a list of books that anyone can read, non-specialists can read, just to broaden and deepen their appreciation of the musical phenomenon. So I've put together a bunch of books that I think a broad range of people could enjoy. You don't have to have a technical understanding of music necessarily to understand them. Just a bunch of things that I think that can really help you to appreciate music a little bit more. So here they are in no particular order. Music of the 20th Century by Toon de Leeuw. Toon de Leeuw was one of the most important and influential Dutch composers of the 20th century, and he wrote this remarkable book around the mid-century. I think it came out around 1955, so it may be a peculiar thing to write a book about a century of music when you're only halfway through that century, but nevertheless, I think this is an extremely important book, and he has a very interesting vantage point on all of the different currents and tendencies in 20th century music at the time that he wrote it. So obviously, it's influenced by the perspective that he had writing it in the mid-century, but he does an incredible job of just elucidating some of the particular issues that composers were facing and some of the things that they were trying to resolve in their work. And I think he has just a beautiful overview of all the different practices that were being established at the time. And he's able to bring all sorts of relatively recent historical phenomena into a very sharp focus in this book. So he talks about Bartók, he talks about Debussy, he talks about electronic music, and he ties all of it into a very, very compelling and very clearly written narrative that I think makes very, very interesting reading. And you don't have to be a specialist, you don't have to be a composer to enjoy this book. It just tells you a lot about what happened, especially in the first half of the 20th century. Nouritza Matossian's biography of the Greek composer Yanis Xenakis. So this is a book that I've actually read several times. It's incredibly well written. It's gripping. It's got a fascinating story behind it. And she also tells you in a very, very interesting and compelling manner just what it was like to be an avant-garde composer after the Second World War. So Xenakis is somebody who had a really incredible life story. So he was seriously injured in the mid-1940s. He was involved in the resistance fighters in occupied Greece at the time and had half of his face blown off. He endured a horrific injury that very nearly killed him, somehow survived, moved to Paris, and became one of the most influential composers of his entire generation and really revolutionized 20th century music. So this is just an incredible story of triumphing over adversity, managing to stick to a very unique and singular musical vision, and ultimately triumphing. So it gives you all sorts of perspective on what it was like being a composer at that period, and also just what the character of this particular composer was. Songwriters on Songwriting by Paul Zollo. So this is a book that you don't actually see often mentioned, and certainly I've never actually encountered another composer that was familiar with it, but this is an absolute goldmine of a book. It's incredible. Like this guy, Paul Zollo, who I gather is an American songwriter, interviewed a very, very wide range of people who were active songwriters in America in the 20th century. And pretty much every major songwriter you can think of is mentioned in here, and it's a very, very wide swath of creative people. So as someone who is actually very interested in the song form and in popular music in general, I think that this is a very, very interesting book because Paul Zollo knows the craft of music. He talks to these people, not just about, the sort of banal questions about, what is your next album going to be like, that sort of thing, and asking them, questions about their personal lives, but actually going into the details of what it was that caused them to write a particular song, how they approached it technically, what their writing routine is like, and so on. So it really takes you into the songwriter's workshop. And he interviews all kinds of people. He interviews Van Dyke Parks, Madonna, Leonard Cohen, Neil Young. I can't remember how many interviews there are in this book, but it's amazing. And the thing about this book also is that you don't have to read it cover to cover. You can pick it up and find the interviews that you're most interested in reading. And most of them are sort of breezy, they're conversational, but they're also intensely informative. So this is a book that I would definitely recommend to anyone who's interested in some of the great achievers in the field of popular music. Give my regards to 8th Street, Collected Writings of Morton Feldman. So Morton Feldman is a composer that those who know me well understand is very important to me, and I think he was just a fascinating figure, not only for his music, but also just the personality. I mean, Feldman was definitely a larger-than-life character. He was extremely funny, extremely witty, very conversational, and he gave a lot of talks and lectures over the course of his life and career that were archived, and some of them have been written up and transcribed, and then he also wrote some essays that are also present in this volume. And I think the wonderful thing about this book is he's very Catholic in terms of the types of music that he talks about, and he has a very idiosyncratic approach to describing the things that are important to him. So again, it's a book that gives you a kind of very idiosyncratic personal overview of the time in which this composer lived. It's also incredibly funny, and it's not technical at all. So anyone can pick it up and enjoy it and get a sense of the sort of fascinating personality of Morton Feldman. Charles Rosen's The Classical Style. So this is, by all accounts, a classic book. I mean, it's just an insanely brilliant work of scholarship, of musicianship. Charles Rosen has just an incredibly profound understanding of classical music and what makes it function, and he knows the repertoire like the back of his hand. I mean, he knows hundreds of pieces, it seems, almost by heart. He was also a renowned concert pianist, and he had this sort of incredible depth of analytical regard when he looks at music. He seems to understand it on a level that goes beyond, I think, what almost any musician can hope to achieve. And he has this just very, very deep historical awareness and perception that informs his writing as well. So the thing about this book, The Classical Style, is that it really sets out to explain not just what are the basic characteristics of the classical style, so i.e. the music that was written between, let's say, Mozart and Beethoven, but also why did it evolve the way it did? What does that mean? What does this music have to say? What are the sort of profound underpinnings of this particular style? Why did it arise in the first place? And he takes you through all the different genres of classical music, opera, symphonies, etc., and chamber music, string quartets. And he sort of talks about a lot of the major pieces that were written in those particular genres, and takes you also through why those particular pieces are innovative and compelling and why they deserve repeated listenings. So if you're interested in getting better acquainted with classical music generally, I don't think you could find a better place to start than this incredibly engaging, well-written, and erudite book. Maynard Solomon's Mozart, A Life. Mozart, as many of you will know from having seen the film Amadeus, was a very, very interesting character. And Maynard Solomon goes into a great deal of detail in just exposing what sort of man he was through letters, through contemporary accounts of what Mozart was like. He talks about his entourage, about his relationships with his family, and he also talks about just the overall period of the time. So it's a great, great, great book. I've read it twice, actually, because it really shines a light on this entire period that Mozart was living in. It will give you a much deeper, broader appreciation of Mozart's accomplishments as an artist, and also of him as a person, in all of his faults and all of his strange attributes that are certainly alluded to in Amadeus. So this is a wonderful book. And incidentally, Maynard Solomon also wrote a biography of Beethoven that I think is one of the great classic books on Beethoven. So both of those books certainly would get my recommendation. But the Mozart one is particularly compelling. John Eliot Gardner's Bach, Music in the Castle of Heaven. I think that Bach is absolutely central to Western music. I think that if you are interested in approaching classical music generally and in broadening your understanding of it, Bach is probably the best place to start. And this is just a magnificent book by a performer, a conductor, a very, very well-known conductor who has an incredible understanding of the music and just a deep love for it that comes through very clearly in every page of this book. So if you get through this book, you'll have a detailed understanding of a very broad range of Bach's output, particularly the vocal music, the cantatas, the great passions, the oratorios. And he just writes so engagingly in such a way that, I mean, it's a book really intended for a general readership, but it's just incredibly compelling to read as a narrative, and his literary style is wonderful because he manages to communicate his obsession with the music, his passion for it in a way that is really infectious. And I think as you're reading it, you're going to want to listen to the works, you're going to want to maybe listen to them repeatedly, and your understanding of them will certainly be greatly enriched. So there you have it. There's a bunch of books that I think are really important, and I'm going to give also one bonus recommendation, which is for Francophone viewers out there. Histoire de la musique occidentale, published by Fayard. So Fayard is a publisher based in France that's put out a long series of biographies of composers and just books about the history and techniques of Western composition. And this is just a wonderful book. Again, it's very, very long. It's like 1,300 pages or so. You're not going to necessarily want to read it cover to cover, but if there's a particular topic you're interested in, or a historical period, or a composer, odds are it's treated in great detail in this book, and you'll get a very good synthetic overview of it in a relatively compact space. If you read French and you want a good general history of Western music, this is a very good place to start. And so just one other thing before I end this video, which is that most of you probably know already, because I've published a couple of videos about this, that recently I had a new CD come out called Music with No Edges, and I just want to announce that the CD is now available. It came out from Kairos Records in Vienna a few weeks ago, and it is now available worldwide. You can get it on Amazon, and it will very shortly be available also on iTunes and Spotify. So if you want to know what I've been working on for a great deal of the past year, then you can hear this new CD. If you get a copy of it, I'd love to know what you think about it. So those are my recommendations for books, and I'll see you very soon with another video. If you like this channel, support it. Your help allows me to keep on making high-quality music education videos available to anyone around the world who wants to watch them at any time for free. Check out the rewards for varying levels of support at www.patreon.com/SamuelAndreyev. Thanks for watching.